My stepmother swore I wouldn't see a dime from my dad's $150 million will. She sat there smug, grinning as the lawyer began to read, but then he stopped, looked straight at me, and smiled. What followed wiped the smile right off her face. Dear viewers, I hope you will support us by simply subscribing to our channel. Also, like, share, and comment, and tell me from where you are watching this video. Hello, my name is Ethan Carter. I'm 29 years old, fighting through the rough beginnings of building a business inside a cramped apartment in Atlanta, where bold dreams crash against harsh realities. I'm not someone who lingers too long in the past. But certain memories remain like sharp blades cutting deep whenever I brush against them. They take me back to brighter days, to family, to my mother, and to the single moment that destroyed everything. This is my story. A story that begins in beauty before the world collapsed. I was born and raised in Dalton, Georgia, a small town celebrated as the carpet capital of America. But for us, it wasn't carpets alone. It was textiles, the clothing trade that lifted the Wentz family name. My father, Daniel Wentz, ran the largest garment factory in the region. A tall, imposing figure, yet his smile could melt stone. He was the sort of man who drew every gaze when he entered a room, not because of wealth or status, but because his very presence radiated strength and stability. My mother, Elizabeth, was his perfect contrast, gentle, soft, like spring air. Her brown eyes sparkled whenever they rested on me, as though I was her entire universe. Our home was a grand mansion on a hill, surrounded by her roses that bloomed through every season. I remember summer afternoons when golden light poured through the tall windows, and my mother would sit in her armchair reading aloud in a voice as comforting as a lullaby. My father's work kept him busy. But whenever he was home, we gathered around the dining table, sharing food, laughter, and stories. As an 8-year-old boy, I believed I lived in a perfect world, untouched by sadness. But life never allows perfection to last. Everything shifted one April afternoon, just after my 9th birthday. That was the day my memories were scarred with blood and sorrow. My mother had taken me to the park near our house. I was running with a kite my father had just bought me when suddenly she pulled me back. Her voice urgent yet calm. "Ethan, get behind me." I froze, confused, watching her shoulders tremble. A stranger in a black jacket stood before us, a baseball cap hiding his face. In his hands was a gun. His voice shook as he threatened. "Hand over the boy, and no one gets hurt." Fear thundered in my chest. Not for myself, but because of the tension I felt in my mother. She didn't move, only pressed me further behind her. "No," she said firmly. "You will not touch my son." The man growled, lifting the gun higher. Everything blurred. My mother's voice rang out. "Run, Ethan." But my feet were frozen. Then the gunfire. 1, 2, 3 shots cracking through the air. I fell, not because I was struck, but because my mother had thrown herself over me. She collapsed, blood spreading dark over the green grass. Her warm eyes began to dim. I screamed her name, clutching her, but warmth was slipping from her body. My father appeared, sprinting toward us. He fell to his knees beside her, sobbing like a child, crying, "Elizabeth, Elizabeth, don't leave me." But she was gone forever. The shooter was caught soon after, a desperate addict drowning in debt who thought stealing the son of a wealthy family would solve his life. He never imagined a small woman could be so fierce, choosing death to protect her child. He was arrested and sentenced, but no verdict could erase the emptiness inside me and my father. My mother was gone, and with her a part of me was buried, too. In the days after her death, our big house turned cold, echoing with emptiness. My father, once a figure of unshakable strength, had become a hollow shell. He spent endless hours locked away in his study, eyes swollen from tears, holding their wedding photo as if it was the only thing keeping him alive. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. Every time I shut my eyes, I saw her falling. The red stains spreading on the grass, the gunfire still ringing in my ears. I was only 9, yet I had already tasted the cruelty of life. My father tried to hold me, whispering promises that things would be okay, but I knew he didn't believe his own words. We were both trapped, father and son, in a spiral of grief we couldn't escape. I began to wonder if it was my fault, if I hadn't been there, if I had run faster, if I hadn't needed her to shield me. Those questions dug into me, carving scars I carried in silence. I was no longer the carefree boy who ran through the park. And over the years, I became more like my father, a shadow moving quietly through our haunted home. He still managed the company, but the spark in his eyes was gone. He bought me gifts, took me on trips, tried to fill the emptiness with things, but nothing could replace her. I started to learn something painful. That grief doesn't fade away with time. It lingers. It follows you like an unwanted companion, no matter how far you run. But that was only the beginning. My life was about to crack again in a way I never expected. I was 12 when my father brought another woman home. Her name was Isabella. I remember that night vividly, the chandelier spilling light across her face. She was stunning, yes, golden hair that shimmered and sharp green eyes, colder than ice. My father stood beside her with his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. A strange smile tugging at his lips. "Ethan," he said softly. "This is Isabella. She's going to be part of our family." I froze. My hands gripped the table so hard it hurt. Part of our family. Our family had been 3 people. My father, my mother, me. But my mother was gone. And now the man who had once wept beside her lifeless body was introducing another woman as if she had never existed. I searched his eyes for the man I used to know. But I saw only exhaustion and a quiet plea for me to accept her. I couldn't. I turned and stormed upstairs, ignoring him calling after me. "Ethan, wait." From that day forward, Isabella became a permanent figure in our lives, and everything began to fall apart. She was nearly 20 years younger than my father, always dressing like she was stepping into a grand ballroom. Her perfume was so heavy it drowned out the roses my mother had planted in the garden. And worst of all, she walked through our house like it belonged to her. The curtains my mother had chosen, replaced with flashy red silk. The painting my mother made with her own hands, taken down and swapped for a massive mirror. Each change cut me deeper, as if Isabella's goal was to erase my mother piece by piece. But it wasn't just the house. It was my father. Slowly, I watched him change. No more long hours in his study clutching the wedding photo. Instead, he was traveling with her, laughing at parties, discussing plans I was never included in. I became a stranger in my own home. And then Isabella got pregnant. When I was 13, she gave birth to Christopher. 2 years later came Hannah. Both of them with the same blonde hair and icy green eyes as their mother. Proof that my father had moved on completely. Isabella never let me forget it. She bragged openly that Christopher and Hannah were his new joy while I was nothing but a relic of his first life. I once overheard her on the phone laughing sweetly while telling a friend, "Ethan, he's just the kid from the old marriage, he doesn't matter." Her words poisoned me. She never treated me like family. She mocked me with her tone, belittled me with her stares, cut me out of dinners like I wasn't even there. Once when I dropped a glass in the kitchen, she didn't just scold me. She pointed at me in front of the staff and said, "See, always making trouble. No wonder Daniel has to work so hard to support such a useless boy." I stood there, 14 years old, fists clenched so tight my nails broke skin. But I said nothing because I knew if I spoke, she would only use it as more proof to paint me as pathetic. In the rare moments of clarity he still had, my father would try to reach out to me. Sometimes late at night when Isabella was asleep, he would gently knock on my door and ask, "Ethan, are you okay? Do you want to talk?" But I could never bring myself to open up. Every time I looked at him, all I could see was the image of my mother collapsing in the park. And the question burned in my mind. How could he go on living, laughing, and loving someone else when she had given up everything for me? I answered him with short replies like, "I'm fine," or "It's nothing." Then shut the door, leaving him alone in the hallway. Deep down, I knew he was hurting, too. I saw it in his tired eyes and the way his shoulders sagged when I turned away. But I couldn't forgive him. Not then. To me, he had betrayed my mother, betrayed me, and shattered the happy life we once had. Whenever I heard Christopher and Hannah's laughter echo through the halls, it felt like my existence was being erased. The home that once overflowed with love had turned into a cold glass cage, locking me inside my loneliness. During those years, I learned to survive by retreating into myself. I locked my door, lost myself in books, and dreamed of the day I could escape. I no longer ran through the garden or sat on the porch to watch the sunset. I became a silent shadow, moving carefully through the house that no longer felt like mine. Isabella and her children filled every corner. And no matter how hard I tried, I could not find a space where I belonged. I began counting down the days until I was old enough to leave, unaware that harder trials still waited for me, that my pain had not yet reached its deepest point. But in those lonely years, one truth settled in my heart. Sometimes family isn't the one you're born into, it's the one you fight to rediscover within yourself. At 18, I stood at the gates of the house I once called home. Suitcase in hand and heart unbearably heavy. I didn't glance back as I stepped through the iron gate, where my mother's rose bushes had been replaced by Isabella's perfectly trimmed shrubs. My father stood on the porch, his tall frame slightly bent under the weight of time. "Ethan," he called out, his voice carrying a mixture of hope and sorrow. "Call me if you ever need anything, okay?" I only nodded without turning around. I couldn't risk seeing his eyes, afraid that I might break, run back, hug him, and forgive him. But I wasn't ready. Not yet. I boarded a bus leaving Dalton for Athens, where the University of Georgia awaited me with a full scholarship, my only ticket out of the cold glass cage that house had become. I carried nothing more than a few clothes, a photo of my mother, and a heart scarred with pain. Athens was like another world. Tree-lined streets, crowded lecture halls, and faces that knew nothing of my past. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe, even if each breath was fragile. College life wasn't easy. To survive, I worked in a small cafe, waiting tables from dawn until late at night to cover expenses beyond my scholarship. Most nights, I sat in my dorm, studying until my eyes stung from exhaustion. Not out of ambition, but because I had no other choice. I had no safety net, no family to fall back on. While Isabella, Christopher, and Hannah lived comfortably in the Dalton mansion, I squeezed into a tiny dorm room, surviving on instant noodles and cold coffee. I chose engineering as my major. Though deep inside, another idea had begun to burn. Using technology to transform the textile industry, the same world my father had built his career on. I wasn't sure why I clung to that path. Maybe it was my fragile way of staying connected to him, even through anger. I buried myself in studying automation and AI systems that could optimize production lines. I dreamed of one day standing on my own, not needing the Wentz family name or a cent from my father. After graduation, I secured a stable job at a tech company in Atlanta. The pay was decent, the work professional, but I couldn't shake the emptiness. I didn't want to live my life working for someone else. At 25, I made the bold decision to quit, pouring all my savings into my own venture. My idea was to design software that used AI to reduce waste and improve efficiency in garment factories. On paper, it sounded promising, but in reality, it meant sleepless nights, countless failed investor pitches, and moments where bankruptcy loomed over me like a shadow. Many nights, I sat alone in my small apartment, staring at a nearly empty bank account, wondering if I was ruining myself. Yet, through all of it, I never once picked up the phone to call my father. Our relationship had nearly vanished. Occasionally, his assistant would send an email or a secretary would call saying he wanted to meet. I always refused, claiming I was too busy. Once he even sent me a birthday card with a check inside. I tore up the check immediately, but kept the card because it carried a handwritten note in his familiar script. "I'm proud of you, Ethan. Even if you don't need me, I'm always here." I didn't respond. I couldn't. My heart was still too fractured. Loneliness became my companion, an old scar that I learned to live with. I didn't want pity or rescuing. I only needed myself, and I held on to the belief that one day I would prove I didn't need anyone, not even my father. But when I was 29, everything shifted with a single phone call. I was in my small rented office in an Atlanta industrial park when my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I answered casually, but the woman's voice on the other end was cold and detached, as if she were reciting from a script. "Ethan Carter, I'm calling on behalf of Mr. Daniel Wentz. He's in the hospital. Lung cancer, terminal stage. He wants to see you." I froze, gripping the phone until my knuckles turned white. Lung cancer, terminal stage. The words shot through me like bullets. My father, the strong, towering man who had once been the center of my world, was now lying in a hospital bed, fighting against death itself. I don't know how long I sat there, only that when I stood, my legs trembled, and a part of me, one I had buried long ago, began to crack. I returned to Dalton for the first time in over a decade. The house on the hill was still the same, but it felt foreign, as if I were an unwelcome guest. Isabella opened the door, her cold green eyes scanning me. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice dripping with disdain. "He doesn't need you here." I didn't respond, brushing past her to enter the house. Christopher and Hannah, now teenagers, looked at me like I was a stranger. "Who are you? Why are you in our house?" Hannah asked, her tone mirroring Isabella's. I didn't care. I was there for my father, not them. My father's bedroom was now a cold place filled with the smell of antiseptic and the hum of machines creating a heavy atmosphere. He lay in bed so thin I barely recognized him. His hair was snow white, his skin pale, and his eyes sunken. He was no longer the towering man who used to carry me on his shoulders when I was a child. A nurse stood by his side, checking the heart monitor and the 4 bag hanging beside the bed. When he saw me, his eyes lit up, if only for a moment. "Ethan, you came," my father whispered, his voice weak but filled with emotion. I quietly sat down in the chair beside his bed, taking his hand, hoping to give him some strength. I stayed for a few days to support my father, and those days were a series of silent battles. Isabella and her children seized every opportunity to make things difficult. They didn't let me sleep in a bedroom, claiming there wasn't enough space. I was forced to sleep in the living room. When I sat talking with my father, they would interrupt, saying I was tiring him out. Once, while I was sitting by his bedside reading a book we both loved, Isabella stormed in, snatched the book, and threw it into a corner. "Don't bring useless things in here. You're just making him more tired." I clenched my fists, swallowing my anger only because I didn't want to upset my father. But one night, when Isabella and the kids were asleep, I slipped into my father's room. The nurse had just left to check on medications, and the room was lit only by the dim glow of a bedside lamp. My father stirred as I sat down, his eyes lighting up briefly before welling with tears. "Ethan," he said, his voice trembling, almost a whisper. "I've followed your journey all these years. I know how hard you've worked, how much you've struggled. I wanted to help you, but I didn't know how. I was afraid you still hated me." My throat tightened, seeing him lying there, frail and full of regret. I no longer saw the man who had married Isabella, who had left me alone in my own home. I saw only my father, a man facing death, trying to make amends for his mistakes. "Dad," I said, my voice breaking. "I don't hate you. I just didn't know how to forgive." He grasped my hand, his cold, trembling fingers still carrying a surprising strength. "Ethan," he whispered, "I can't change the past. I can't fix what I've done to you, to your mother, but I can leave something for your future. I want you to know that I've always believed in you, even if I didn't say it enough." Tears streamed down his face, and for the first time in years, I couldn't hold back, letting my own tears fall. I leaned down, hugging him, feeling the faint warmth of his body. And in that moment, I knew I didn't want to lose him. Not now. Not when I had just rediscovered a part of him. 6 months later, my father passed away. I received the news from a midnight call while sitting in my small Atlanta apartment, surrounded by stacks of documents and a flickering computer screen. Isabella's voice on the other end was icy, devoid of emotion. "Ethan, Daniel passed this afternoon. I'm calling to inform you, but you don't need to come. The will has been finalized. There's nothing for you. All the assets belong to me, Christopher, and Hannah." She paused as if waiting for a reaction, but I stayed silent. "Did you hear me?" she pressed, her voice sharp. I whispered, "I understand," and hung up, not giving her a chance to say more. I sat there in the dark, feeling as if a piece of my heart had shattered. I didn't care about the will or the assets. I was devastated because I wasn't there for my father's final moments. Isabella and her children had done everything to keep me away from him, barring me from staying at the house, interrupting every conversation, turning every moment with him into a battle. My father died without me holding his hand one last time, without me saying goodbye. That pain, more than the loneliness of the past years, cut into my chest like a knife. Still, I returned to Dalton for the funeral. I stood quietly in a far corner of the cemetery under the shade of an old oak tree, watching from a distance as my father's coffin was lowered into the ground. Isabella stood among the crowd, dressed in an expensive black dress, her eyes dry behind large sunglasses. Christopher and Hannah stood beside her, feigning sadness, but unable to hide their impatience as if waiting for something greater. I didn't approach, didn't cause a scene, didn't fight for anything. I just wanted to say farewell to my father, even if only in silence. As the funeral ended, the crowd dispersed. Isabella passed by me without a glance, but paused just long enough to hurl a cutting remark. "You don't belong here, Ethan. Don't come back." Christopher, now 16, smirked. "Yeah, you're not family." Hannah, younger but no less venomous, chimed in. "Mom's right. You're just trouble." I didn't respond, only lowered my head, letting them walk away. The sound of Isabella's high heels echoing on the gravel path. Inside, anger flared, but I held it back. This wasn't the time for arguments. This was the time to say goodbye to my father. When everyone had left the cemetery, I stood alone before my father's grave. The stone headstone bore his name, Daniel Wentz, simple yet dignified like the man himself. I placed my hand on the stone, feeling its cold surface, and whispered, "I'm sorry, Dad. I wasn't there when you needed me most." Tears fell silently, soaking into the earth. I don't know how long I stood there, only that the pain in my heart was like a wave, rising and receding, leaving behind a numbing void. Suddenly, a low, gentle voice spoke behind me. "You're Ethan, aren't you?" I turned to see an older man with silver hair, dressed neatly in a black suit. He extended his hand, his smile kind, but his eyes sharp. "I'm Matthew Grayson, your father's personal attorney." I nodded, slightly wary. "Hello, sir. Is something wrong?" I wasn't expecting anything from this encounter. After Isabella's words about the will, I had braced myself for nothing but painful memories. Mr. Grayson looked at me, his gaze piercing. "Do you have a moment? There are some things about your father I think you should know." I hesitated but nodded. We walked to a small cafe near the cemetery where the smell of coffee mingled with the damp afternoon air. He ordered 2 black coffees and sat down, opening his briefcase to pull out a thick stack of documents. "Ethan," he began, his voice slow but firm. "Before your father passed, he established an irrevocable trust, a trust that cannot be altered. The majority of his valuable assets were transferred into it, and the sole beneficiary is you. I blinked, unable to believe my ears. What did you say? My heart raced, not out of greed, but from shock. Isabella said the will left everything to her and her kids. Mr. Grayson smiled, a mix of sadness and mischief in his expression. The will is only part of the story. Daniel was a smart man. He knew exactly what was happening in his family. He wanted to ensure you were protected, that you received what you deserve. He slid the documents toward me. The trust includes the textile factory, the main Dalton mansion, the horse racing track, the yacht, and most of his investment portfolio. It all belongs to you. I sat stunned, feeling the air in the cafe grow heavy. I flipped through the documents, seeing numbers, asset names, and my father's signature, the same scrawled handwriting I'd seen on birthday cards. Tears welled up again, not for the value of the assets, but for what they meant. My father had thought of me even when I pushed him away. He had believed in me even when I didn't believe in myself. He set up this trust 3 years ago, Mr. Grayson continued, his voice softening. He told me you were the only one who understood the true value of the work he'd built. He wanted you to carry on his legacy in your own way. I bowed my head, trying to hold back tears. Thank you, Dad, I whispered, knowing he could no longer hear me. In that moment, I was both grieving his loss and grateful for the gift he left behind. Not just the assets, but the faith I had been searching for all these years. In the days following my father's death, my life in Atlanta drifted through a haze. I returned to my small apartment where the neon lights from the street outside cast shadows on the cracked walls. Each day I woke up, worked, met with investors, and fought to keep my startup from collapsing. But everything felt meaningless. I couldn't shake the image of my father lying in his hospital bed, his trembling hand grasping mine, or the sound of his frail voice during our last conversation. I had forgiven him, but I still hadn't forgiven myself for letting the distance between us linger for so long. Mr. Grayson's words about the trust echoed in my mind, the textile factory, the mansion, the horse racing track, the yacht. These weren't just assets. They were my father's legacy, his life's work. I didn't know how to feel about it. Part of me was overwhelmed, as if I'd been handed a key to a world I never dared to dream of. But a larger part was weighed down by grief. I didn't want the assets. I wanted my father back to tell him I understood, that I no longer resented him. Every night I sat before a photo of my mother and father on my desk, wondering if I was worthy of the faith he had placed in me. Then one morning, my phone buzzed. Mr. Grayson's number flashed on the screen. His voice was steady, like a guide in a storm. Ethan, the reading of your father's will is scheduled for this Friday at my law office in Dalton. You should be there. It was his wish to settle everything. I gripped the phone, my heart racing. I didn't want to face Isabella, Christopher, or Hannah again. Their venomous words at the funeral still rang in my ears, cutting into unhealed wounds. But if this was what my father wanted, I couldn't refuse. I'll be there, I replied, my voice soft but resolute, as if convincing myself. On Friday, I drove back to Dalton, the familiar road now tinged with an unfamiliar feeling. The fields stretching along the highway, the rooftops peeking through the faint sunlight, all reminded me of the days I'd lost. I parked in front of Mr. Grayson's law office, a small but elegant building with large windows overlooking the bustling town street. Dressed in a simple black suit, I walked in with a heavy heart, like a gladiator stepping into an arena. I didn't know what awaited me, but I sensed a vague tension, as if the air was compressed, ready to explode. Inside the meeting room, the atmosphere was so tense it made my skin prickle. Isabella sat at the head of the table, wearing a tight black dress, her icy green eyes sweeping over me like they could tear me apart. She sat upright, chin raised, exuding the smug confidence of someone certain of victory. Christopher and Hannah, seated beside her, smirked as I entered. Christopher, with his tousled blonde hair and arrogant gaze, whispered something to Hannah, making her giggle. Next to them was a man I'd never met, tall with platinum hair, dressed in an expensive gray suit, but with cunning eyes like a wolf stalking prey. That's Andrew, Isabella's brother, Mr. Grayson whispered as I sat beside him. He always shows up when there's money to be sniffed out. What's he doing here? Isabella snapped, her voice sharp as a blade, not bothering to hide her contempt. I told you, Ethan, there's nothing for you. Don't waste our time. Andrew let out a loud laugh, slapping the table as if watching a comedy. Yeah, kid, he said, his deep voice dripping with mockery. My sister's got everything handled. You're just extra baggage. Christopher and Hannah snickered, their eyes like arrows aimed to wound me. I didn't respond, sitting silently, hands clasped tightly under the table to suppress the anger boiling in my chest. I wasn't there to argue or prove anything. I was there for my father, for his promise that everything would be settled. Mr. Grayson, calm as a conductor in a storm, stood and opened the thick stack of documents before him. "We are here to carry out the final wishes of Mr. Daniel Wentz," he said, his voice low and clear, resonating in the tense room. "I will read his official will. Please maintain order." Isabella raised an eyebrow, leaning back in her chair with a smug expression as if she already knew the outcome. Andrew sat close to her, whispering something, his eyes never leaving me, as if assessing whether I was worth bothering with. Christopher and Hannah exchanged knowing glances, as if anticipating a show about to begin. I sat there feeling each heartbeat like a countdown to something I couldn't yet grasp. The air in the room was heavy, as if a storm was about to break. I didn't know what was coming, but deep down I felt a flicker of hope. Not for the assets, but because I believed my father, even in death, had one final thing to say to me. And I knew whatever it was, it would change everything. Mr. Grayson adjusted his glasses, flipping to the first page of the will, his eyes scanning the text, and I felt my heart beat faster. Isabella raised an eyebrow, a smug smile flickering across her lips. Andrew leaned back in his chair, tapping his fingers on the table as if awaiting a neatly wrapped gift. Christopher and Hannah exchanged glances, then turned to me, casting contemptuous looks. Mr. Grayson began. "I, Daniel Wentz, being of sound mind, declare that all my remaining assets shall be bequeathed to my wife, Isabella Wentz, and our 2 children, Christopher Wentz and Hannah Wentz." The room erupted. Isabella clapped her hands, the sharp sound echoing in the space. She turned to me, her eyes gleaming with triumph, a venomous smile spreading across her face. "See, Ethan," she said, her voice sweet but laced with thorns. "I told you there's nothing for you. You're nothing to this family." Christopher burst out laughing, his laughter like a slash. "Wow, big brother, maybe you should go back to your failing startup dreams." Hannah, no less vicious, added, "Mom's right. You're just a loser, Ethan. Stop bothering us." Andrew, with a look of someone who just won the lottery, slapped Isabella's shoulder, laughing loudly. "You did great, sis." The old man finally knew who his real family was. They laughed. They mocked. They looked at me as if I were a stray dog left on the roadside. I sat silently, my hands clenched under the table, feeling the blood boil in my veins. But I said nothing. I just looked at Mr. Grayson, waiting. There was something in his eyes, a mischievous glint, almost imperceptible, that made me feel this wasn't over. Mr. Grayson raised a hand, signaling for silence. "I'm not finished," he said, his voice calm but carrying an odd weight. Isabella stopped laughing, though her smug smile remained fixed. He continued, "The assets of Mr. Daniel Wentz, as inventoried and verified, consist of a cabin in the Colorado mountains and a 1998 Ford vehicle." Silence. A deadly silence enveloped the room as if the air had been sucked out. The smile on Isabella's face froze, then slowly vanished. Christopher and Hannah looked at each other, mouths agape, unable to believe their ears. Andrew sat up straight, eyes wide, his voice trembling. "What? A cabin? A junkie car?" He turned to Isabella as if seeking an explanation. But Isabella wasn't looking at him. Her eyes were fixed on Mr. Grayson, as if she wanted to bore a hole through his calm demeanor. "Are you joking?" Isabella shrieked, her voice high-pitched, almost breaking. "A cabin? An old Ford? What about the valuable assets? The company shares, the mansion, the yacht, the racetrack? Where are they?" She slammed her hand on the table, her red nails scratching the wood, producing grating sounds. Christopher jumped to his feet, face flushed. "This is a scam." The old man couldn't have left just that. Hannah, usually so haughty, sat pale and silent, muttering, "No way. No way." Mr. Grayson, maintaining his unervingly calm demeanor, adjusted his glasses and replied, "I'm not obligated to disclose information about assets not included in the will. What I've read is the entirety of Mr. Daniel Wentz's official will." He looked at Isabella, his gaze unwavering as if he'd prepared for the storm. The room exploded. Isabella leapt to her feet, pointing at Mr. Grayson, nearly screaming, "You're hiding something. Daniel couldn't have done this to me. I was his wife. I stood by him, took care of him." Andrew, his smugness gone, pounded the table, roaring, "Show me that will. There's got to be a mistake. No one's stupid enough to leave just a cabin and a junk car to their family." Christopher and Hannah began shouting, their voices blending into a chaotic, angry, panicked chorus. I sat there feeling like I was watching a play whose ending I already knew. I knew about the trust, about the gift my father had left me, the textile factory, the mansion, the racetrack, the yacht, and most of his investment portfolio. I knew that my father, even in death, had found a way to protect me, to believe in me. But I hadn't expected this moment to come so quickly or to bring such a mix of pain and satisfaction. I stood slowly, my gaze sweeping over Isabella, Christopher, Hannah, and Andrew. They stopped shouting, turning to me with eyes full of rage and suspicion. I took a deep breath, my voice calm but firm as if speaking for my father. The assets you're looking for, the factory, the mansion, the yacht, the racetrack, they're not in the will. My father transferred them into an irrevocable trust. And the sole beneficiary is me. Silence. Once again, the room fell silent. But this time, it wasn't just deadly. It was a collapse. Isabella stared at me, eyes wide, her face pale as paper. She staggered, clutching the table's edge, then slumped into her chair as if all her strength had been drained. No, she muttered, her voice breaking. It can't be. Then, to everyone's shock, she fainted, her body collapsing to the floor, her blonde hair splaying out like a tattered cloth. Christopher screamed, pounding the table repeatedly, face red. You're lying. You did something, you bastard. Hannah, for the first time I'd seen her cry, wailed, Mom. Mom, wake up. Andrew leapt to his feet, pointing at me, his voice trembling with rage. I'll sue you, Ethan. I'll drag you to court. You think you can steal everything? He turned to Mr. Grayson, growling. And you? You're in on this, aren't you? I won't let this slide. I stood there unmoving, saying nothing more. I looked at them, Isabella unconscious on the floor, Christopher shouting like a wounded animal, Hannah sobbing, and Andrew making empty threats. In that moment, I didn't feel triumph. I felt a profound sadness mixed with relief. My father had foreseen all this. He knew who Isabella was, knew how she and those around her would react. And he chose me, not because I was his eldest son, but because he believed I would honor what he'd left behind. Mr. Grayson stood, signaling for a staff member to help Isabella recover. He looked at me, giving a slight nod, as if to say I'd done the right thing. I walked out of the meeting room without looking back, but I could hear Andrew's shouts and Hannah's sobs echoing behind me. The storm had broken, but I wasn't afraid. My father had given me a shield, and I would use it to protect his legacy and my own. The meeting room fell silent as I walked out, the sound of my footsteps echoing on the wooden floor. Afternoon sunlight streamed through the large windows, casting long streaks of light across the hallway as if guiding me toward a new beginning. I paused at the law office's door, taking a deep breath, feeling the cool Dalton air fill my chest. In that moment, I felt not just relief, but a newfound strength. The strength born from the faith my father had left me. I was no longer the lonely boy in a house filled with hostility, nor the young man struggling with unfulfilled startup dreams. I was Ethan Carter, chosen by my father to carry on his legacy. The following week, I officially took over Wentz Textiles, the factory my father had built from nothing. As I stepped into the plant on the outskirts of Dalton, the smell of fresh fabric and the hum of machinery felt like a familiar symphony. The employees, many of whom had worked under my father for decades, regarded me with a mixture of curiosity and caution. They knew me as Daniel Wentz's son, but they also remembered the years of estrangement and the rumors that I'd been cast aside. I didn't resent them for it. I only wanted to prove I was deserving of my father's trust. On my very first day, I stood before the senior management team, the men who had once been my father's closest allies. They gathered around the long conference table, some nodding politely, others folding their arms, waiting to see what I would bring. I didn't attempt to force authority. Instead, I spoke steadily, my tone calm but unshaken. My father built this company with his sweat and his sacrifice. I'm not here to dismantle it. I'm here to take it forward by carrying his vision and blending it with my own. A few faces brightened, though others raised skeptical brows. It didn't matter. I had grown used to skepticism. Immediately, I began reshaping the business. Though Wentz Textiles remained a respected name in Dalton, it had slipped behind its rivals. Outdated production methods, high operational costs, and little innovation had weakened its position. I introduced the idea I had nurtured since college, integrating artificial intelligence into manufacturing. The software I once built for my small struggling startup in Atlanta, though it hadn't succeeded then, became the very foundation of transformation at Wentz Textiles. It streamlined fabric cutting, reduced waste dramatically, and forecasted market demand with precision unlike anything before. The first months were grueling. Veteran workers resisted, fearing that automation meant they'd be replaced. A few longtime managers even resigned, unwilling to accept change from someone they still saw as a kid. But I refused to give up. I led training sessions personally, sitting down with teams to explain how the technology was meant to support them, not erase their livelihoods. I worked 18-hour days, moving from the boardroom to the factory floor, from investor presentations to machine checks. Some nights, I fell asleep at my desk with nothing but a cold cup of coffee beside me and a photograph of my parents watching over me. Slowly, things began to shift. Output climbed, costs shrank, and Wentz Textiles began winning major contracts with international fashion brands. News articles started appearing, calling me a rising entrepreneur, the man restoring Dalton's textile crown. I didn't pay much attention to the recognition. For me, every small victory was a way of honoring my father's faith in me. Yet, I couldn't deny the quiet pride that stirred when I saw the Wentz logo stamped on export shipments or overheard workers saying, "Ethan is more like Daniel than we thought." A year later, I was invited onto a national business channel for a televised interview. Seated under bright studio lights across from a sharp-eyed host with a polished smile, I was asked about my journey, about reviving Wentz Textiles, and about the obstacles I'd overcome. I answered humbly, avoiding self-congratulation. But then she leaned forward and asked, "What truly drove you, Ethan? What gave you the strength not to give up when everything was against you?" I paused, drawing a long breath. Looking into the camera felt as though I was speaking not only to the world, but also to myself. For years, I wasn't acknowledged as a son, I began, my voice firm but quiet. I grew up in a house where I felt like an outsider. But my father, he gave me something far greater than wealth. He gave me his faith. He believed I could succeed even when I doubted myself. And that belief is why I stand here today. The studio fell into silence. The only sound was the low hum of the equipment. The host smiled, though I caught a flicker of emotion in her eyes. I didn't add more. I didn't have to. Those words carried everything I'd ever wished to say to my father and to my mother, who had sacrificed everything to give me a chance. When I left the studio and stepped onto the glowing Atlanta streets, the city lights sparkled like scattered stars. I looked up at the night sky, imagining my parents watching from somewhere above, smiling with pride. I was no longer the forgotten boy in a cold home, nor the lonely young man in a cramped apartment. I was Ethan Carter, heir to my father's legacy, not just in property or wealth, but in resilience, honor, and dignity. And though I knew the road ahead was long, I understood one thing with certainty. I would never walk it alone.